afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Russell Mante from Business Review Webinars, and I'll be your host for today. It is our pleasure to have LeapXpert in collaboration with Shield and FIS with us today. We'll be discussing the risk and rewards of conducting business over messaging apps. Our speakers today are Chilip Lai, Director of Business Development and Channels at LeapXpert, Raiko Moody, Surveillance SME at Shield, Kyle Gardner, SVP Training and Processing at FIS. Before we begin, I would like to welcome you to our webinar platform, GD platform. You'll notice that this webinar is browser-based, so if you do disconnect for any reason, please just click on the link that you received via email to rejoin the session. In order to ask questions, you can send them in via the questions widget. Just type them into the box at the top right-hand corner of your screen and click submit. We'll allocate some time at the end of the session to address any questions or thoughts that you may have. But we'll now get started with the poll question. So guys, just give me a second. So guys, we have a poll question. If the audience can just click polls and surveys at the bottom of the screen, you should see a question that comes up. Are you currently allowing instant messaging apps such as SMS, WhatsApp, WeChat, etc. for business communication organization? I'll just give the audience a few seconds to get their results in. So Chilip, Raiko, Cal, what results are you expecting?
I think no, where it's no and no plans to, or no, not yet. I think those are probably going to be the two most popular, but can't wait to see.
Yeah, probably some mixture of no, but not pure yes.
Let's see, guys.
I'm sure there's quite a few firms that are looking into it, how to embrace these. So.
Sure.
Cool. Let's see. So we do have a few votes in, and yep. So majority 55% no and no plans to, and the other 44% will be no, not yet, but we're looking into it. Are these the results you were expecting, guys?
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yep.
Cool, perfect. Moving on. So we'll now get started with our panel discussion. So the first question will be, as the world becomes more technology-centered and messaging communications emerge as the norm for businesses, enterprises are leaning into modern B2C communication channels, text messaging and messaging apps. What are the risks of embracing these new channels?
Yeah, so Russell, that's an interesting question. As I kind of look at that, especially in light of the recent poll question, it's interesting. I think every enterprise to some extent has adopted some type of messaging or new communication channel, especially as we look at the last 2 years. I mean, for the most part, that's how organizations were able to keep moving forward in the industry. But really, when you look at these and you look at the emergence of new channels and things like that, there's really kind of three areas of risk that I would kind of break down as we look at this. The first being compliance and risk, the second being operational, and the third being employee and customer satisfaction. As we look at that first one, kind of the compliance level, I mean, you can go search Google. I'm not going to go over all the different fines that are pending in the industry, but we see the regulators across the world actively sweeping for communications audits. They're looking at what firms are using, how those are being monitored, how they're being surveilled, what else firms are using that and I'll call an unofficial way. Basically, employees are using it. They found a way around it. Or really where firms have a program in place and there's gaps in that program. That's one thing that we always have to pay attention to. So that's kind of first up from a compliance and risk perspective. You then kind of go to the operational effect of this. I mean, it's interesting. I saw a survey yesterday that said that something like 95% of firms struggle with unstructured data. This data is unstructured. It's about as unstructured as it gets. So when you look at spinning up these programs, you have to staff these appropriately. You have to bring the appropriate teams. You need to bring scale into this somehow, especially when you look at the level of false positives. I mean, there's 99.9% of false positives that a lot of firms are dealing with. And so you have to have a strong, robust operational program that's put in place around this that balances out with some technology. And then that third area that I mentioned, just around employees and customer satisfaction, to me, that's actually not a risk as much as that's an opportunity. I mean, we also look back at even the last 6 months, and you look at the amount of turmoil that we've seen in the markets with employees that we thought would be lifelong employees or long tenured employees. They're leaving, they're going to new firms. And what's interesting is we've seen with a lot of the new workers in the markets, a lot of the new employees, that they're willing to leave over their preferred communication method if it's not embraced by a firm. Similarly, we're all doing business with customers. If you can't communicate with them in a preferred manner, eventually that friction kind of pushes them to someone that is going to accommodate their preferred manner. So that, to me, it's not as much a risk, but that's an opportunity to really buoy up the experience of our employees and the experience of our customers. So interesting question. Rieko, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. And just to reintroduce myself, I'm Rieko Moody, and I am a surveillance SME at Shield. Prior to actually joining Shield, I've worked for at a few financial institutions, in compliance and risk management. I agree with Kyle. I think almost, all the point. I think it's pretty clear that we are facing significant risks today, right? When you watch the news, you hear about $200 million fines, and many other firms are also being probed by SEC or CFTC, and it's all because employees were communicating with each other on unapprovable channels such as WhatsApp. And, people may actually think, oh, what is the big deal to communicate on unapprovable channels? It's like so much easier, obviously, just to talk to your coworkers via text. And, you may think that it's really actually not something that I was trying to, circumvent or try to abuse the market. But, it's also because firm really needs to be able to pull any business related conversations if they were questioned by regulators. Literally, companies will be left without the business communications that they're supposed to retain and record keep. And yes, that is actually a really big deal because, it is a regulatory breach. So, a lot of you probably already know, but so to me, the risks that the firms are facing, reputational risk, regulatory risk, compliance risk, and then also, operational risk. And then hopefully, all of you will have some, takeaways today on how you can protect your firm. So that's my kind of take. Chilip, would you like to add your thoughts?
Thanks, Rieko. Hi, everyone. I'm Chilip Lai at LeapXpert, and I help our clients and partners enable responsible business communication across all these different instant messaging apps. Kind of looking at it as a kind of outside of the US and having a look at different markets and different industries as well. I think the UK Financial Conduct Authority, they came out quite early in 2021. In regards to WhatsApp, they actually stated there is no specific restriction on these new technologies or these apps. It's the challenge is your recording obligations and having that control and oversight. So they kind of come out really early on to say, look, the technology is not the issue, it's the ability to control and manage it. So one of the risks there. We've had a look at some of the legal industry as well. So again, Solicitors Regulation Authority, since really summer of last year, have been publishing scam alerts of people impersonating lawyers and law firm employees, again on WhatsApp. So pretty much every month they're reporting either a US big law firm, a Magic Circle, or even a smaller boutique firm are having issues where scammers are pretending to be lawyers they know people respond to messaging apps, and trying to get information, whether it's about a case, personal details, banking information. And still we're in the UK, public sector as well. I'm sure you may have seen UK politicians, from the health minister himself to the prime minister, being caught up in what they're calling government by WhatsApp. So questioning the trust and transparency, even in the public sector, we've seen a lot of challenges there and risks. And only very recently, in the last month, the German financial watchdog has mentioned, obviously, they're looking at senior bank executives on their use again on all these private messaging channels such as WhatsApp. Now, closer to Asia, in Singapore, we've seen a specific challenge around SMS and texting. So it's still a very popular way to communicate as well. A Singaporean bank last month just got sanctioned for allowing, not dealing with the scams on instant messaging and text messaging. So there was almost 800 customers. They lost almost $10 million based on these scam text messages and SMS. And closer really to Hong Kong here, we've worked a lot with the regulators in Hong Kong for the last few years. They've reached out to the market, the RegTech community here, to look at potential solutions to these challenges. Banks are reporting a lot of phishing instant messaging text scams. So that's one of their major concerns. Pretty much 4 reports a month banks are making to say there are people impersonating the institutions and trying to commit fraud or some kind of scam. So we've looked at, in terms of a centralized and enterprise approach, and we've had, our approach published several times on the bank regulator's website here. And, we were very lucky to win an award over the last year as well. So kind of a review really of the rest of the world and what's happening in all different markets.
Thank you for elaborating on that, guys. So, with the serious consequences highlighted and increased scrutiny of businesses using instant messaging apps, what solutions have you seen used to address these issues in the market? What do you think, Chilip?
Okay. I think obviously the first point of call is policy, like typically banning or forbidding the use of instant messaging. As we saw in the poll results, I don't think we had a positive yes response to the use of instant messaging for business. But the challenge would be that it's so popular, it's so pervasive, it's so easy to use, so banning isn't really an option. What I've seen with our clients and partners is there's band-aid technological solutions where a lot of reverse engineering, a lot of imitating the actual messaging app. So each messaging app has its own unique solution, where it's a WhatsApp, a WeChat, Telegram, SMS, and so on. So they try and manage each messaging app individually and have to keep re-engineering a significant risk in terms of downtime, that these solutions don't work and you don't capture all the messages, but also a lot of company resources to manage so many different applications. Another thing that we've noticed is the basic archiving tools. So where they're using web scraping to capture a copy of all the messages. So regardless if it's business related or personal and private, all these messages are archived and kept by the business. So there is a challenge there for employees and their data privacy as well. So those are kind of the 2 main ones that I've seen. Rieko, I think you are mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Chilip. Yeah, I think it's actually important to keep in mind, as Chilip said, that archiving or record keeping is it's an absolute must, and firms definitely need to adhere. Whether I think initially, even if it's a band-aid solution, it's something though definitely like that you have to have. So, the first really thing to focus on is to make sure that you're capturing all the channels, right? Are you aware of all the possible channels that every business uses? again, I think we've heard like from some of the news, like some firms actually were not aware that it was existing and it was actually like, being used. Maybe like AWM businesses, they actually use totally different channel from equity trading. So I think initially, mapping exercise is really crucial here, I think. And then also, you also want to make sure that you have a technology to capture them in a warm, compliant archive solution. So, archiving obviously is the first step, but, just because you're capturing all the channels and, archive them, unfortunately, obviously that's not enough. We need to really think about, what if someone actually try to circumvent and take the conversation offline or to, some unapproved channel or to a different account that is not approved. Unfortunately, there would always be, those like bad actors or employees that that exist. So you need to make sure that you monitor those instances as well. And then I think regarding the monitoring, we've seen many firms actually still leverage simple lexicons, but I think we all know that's no longer good enough, right? Like I think everyone should like really think how to leverage sophisticated AI to identify certain conversations that may breach regulations. No one really should spend their valuable time by combing through, false positive ecom alerts. Like Kyle said, 99% false positive alerts. It's such a waste of time and waste of your great resources. So, I think it's just kind of like a time to really think about how to really monitor them. So address the issue that we've seen is that to capture all the channels and then also make sure you archive them. But then also B, you also need to monitor employees' communications or behaviors, I think.
Yeah, this is interesting, Chilip and Reko, listening to you both on this. I think a lot of what you're saying is we've heard very similar conversations with a lot of clients, prospects, kind of industry experts. What's interesting here, you look at kind of where we are with communication surveillance and the regulation, and I would kind of relate this back to a lot of what we saw when personal trading regulation came out in a lot of the markets that we operate in. The initial reaction by most firms was to just stop it. You can hold, if you're an employee and you work at a financial institution, you can hold positions at your employer. Other than that, it's not allowed. There's too much risk. What we found is firms started pushing the boundaries of that, driven by employee demand. They wanted to be able to actively manage their portfolio where they wanted. We started to see technology solutions jump up and raise as that happened. And now what we've seen is we've gone from a very restrictive early regulation in that employee personal monitoring to something that employees can invest, manage their assets wherever they want, however they want, and all of that data is aggregated and reported back to the financial institution who employs them. And I kind of view some of this natural evolution with communication surveillance as well. As been mentioned, sometimes we've taken the very hard stance of just disallow. I think what we have to realize is a lot of these new communication channels are almost so natural and so native to a lot of the employees and customers that we're working with. A lot of times there's not even Reko kind of said it. A lot of times people aren't purposely breaking the rule. It's built into their DNA. This is how they communicate, and they fall back to it without even thinking about it. So first thing that I would kind of state with this is I think firms really have to evaluate the bring your own device type policies. Me personally, I think those are kind of aging. They're going away. Part of being able to actively manage and capture this is providing the employee with a seamless experience where you're not asking them to set all sorts of things up on their own. They're not running 2 or 3 different devices, things like that, because then there's a question of which device they're using for work, which is for personal. So I think really going to a work type device is something that's gonna happen. Also, when you look at the capture, there's gonna be multiple ways to capture that data and aggregate it together. Like for Teams example, obviously it makes sense to use Microsoft for capturing that data and getting a data feed. The real important thing to me becomes where do you aggregate this data and review it holistically. That's really the value of bringing all this communications data together to see, are people bouncing from one system to another purposely, inadvertently, where those communications are happening. And then also you look at some of the solutions in the market as well. Is this communications data, I would argue, is some of those valuable data that a firm can capture and aggregate. When you look at the potential that this data has to enrich, to augment, and to improve your compliance reviews and processes across the board, it's pretty powerful. And so I think that very flexible API manner of, once you've aggregated, captured, analyzed, and then taking this data into other systems. For example, there's a concept of trade reconstruction that can only happen with communications data. I think trade reconstruction will soon go the way of the past, that term will, and there's a general just reconstruction term across all of the compliance regulations that are in the industry utilizing this communications data. I think that's really where we're moving, and I think that's really the value of this is enriching and augmenting all of those processes. So it is very interesting to look at not only the consequences of some of this type of communications data, but the potential that it has to improve all of the processes across the board. But it's a great question, Russell.
Thanks, guys. Again, very good questions raised. So, what are the best ways to optimize your enterprise communications while protecting your brand and empowering employee-client interactions?
I can take that. I think a lot of firms initially try to block certain communication types. I think everyone already touched upon it. But I know I've seen, like, for example, you may not be able to access Facebook, from the company's website or a Twitter account. But I do think that it is time to face the fact that different social medias are now leveraged to interact with the clients, right? I think especially by advisors. And it's definitely no longer enough to block, but to integrate in order to be like reg compliant, but also to promote business and engage with the customers. When you kind of think about the personal life, when someone texts, I think obviously you would respond much quicker. At least I do. And then the emails, you may actually just like wait. And I even like hear that young people nowadays don't even read emails, right? So obviously, like, the demographics are changing and we actually have like more newer clients. So I think we definitely need to think of good balance and a way to like really allow like different communications types, and then making sure though that everyone is compliant. Obviously having a clear policy is really important. Training, reminder, all of those things like really need to be kind of reinforced, time over time. But then also, make sure that you actually have to, have some sort of like monitoring mechanism, I think is the way to go. Kyle, what's your
Yeah.
thought?
Yeah, Rieko, you bring up some really interesting points. I mean, one of those I'd like to dive back down on a little bit more is, as we're embracing these new communication channels, we've seen a level of sophistication from the regulators that we haven't really seen in the past. And I don't think this is specific necessarily just to communications. We're really seeing this across the board. But what's interesting with communications is we're really seeing the regulators step in, and they're leveraging the data that has been submitted by other firms, and they're using that as almost a pre-audit to go into another institution and say, hey, what issues have you had? And when you don't bring up the issue that another firm has already communicated that directly involves one of your employees, I mean, no one wants to be stuck in that situation. So really, the regulation in this part of the market is almost like a peer-to-peer type regulation, and then a regulator to firm regulation. So it's interesting to see that dynamic and how that's really starting to change some things. The other thing that I would say on this is just when I go back to one of the first questions I made, one of the first points about the opportunities here. I mean, there is a dramatic benefit, I believe, to all of us as employees, as well as all of our clients, in having a program that is streamlined and that facilitates these what I'll call frictionless communication channels in a preferred way. And so really we need to look at that. We need to look at who our customer base is, who we're communicating. I mean, there's certain companies that can only communicate via certain communication channels. And if we can't communicate on those channels at our own company, it means we can't do business with them, or our employees are going to find a way to communicate in another way. So there's a lot of pressures that we've put on employees, looking at a lot of our business goals, and we need to recognize that we need to be able to facilitate their execution on those different goals and objectives that we've put on them, especially looking at communications. The last thing I would just state on this also is the systems have to be flexible. Communication channels, there's always going to be new ones. We've seen that over the last couple of years. I think that's just going to be the norm into the future, especially as a lot of us operate on a very global basis. And so you've got to be able to quickly adapt to those new channels and not have it take 6 months, a year, 2 years to get a strategy in place for those, assuming they pass a security review or something like that.
Hey, thanks for that, Carl. Just going back to what Rieko said, we definitely don't want more emails. I think if you take anything from the end of this session is don't have more emails. I'm very happy if that is the only thing that's taken away, but definitely everyone is more responsive on texts and instant messaging. From a technological standpoint, I think kind of the optimum solution really is to have that single centralized platform, something that connects, records and controls messaging. And as Carl said, there's always going to be new messengers. So what's popular now, 10 years from now, you probably think, oh, remember when everyone used to use WhatsApp? That used to be very popular, as they used to say with Skype and MSN Messenger and so on and so forth. So having that ability to add new channels, whether it's iMessage or WeChat, Telegram, Signal, just having that one place where it can connect to official APIs of these messaging apps. I think that's key. And no longer relying on workarounds or even personal messaging accounts, the challenges around there. But also the ability to extend kind of existing business collaboration tools. As Carl mentioned, Microsoft Teams and Slack. So complementing the existing strategic technology investments. So businesses have spent a lot of time, a lot of resources to implement, very popular collaboration tools and messaging tools for internal. But having that ability to connect a Microsoft Teams to WhatsApp or SMS or any type of messenger, that removes kind of the adoption barriers. So the employees are already using Teams. They know how to use Teams. It's very simple. Of course, removing some of those barriers to implementation. So once you have a new solution, you have to go through certain hoops, information security, cybersecurity. So having built and extending out existing investments in Teams, I think would be the optimum solution and just in a more palatable way for both employees, but also in the business leaders as well.
Thank you guys again. Now it's time for another poll question. Again, if the audience can just click the polls/surveys at the bottom of the banner, and we can address the question just below. Just give me a second, guys. So, what is the preferred choice for business communications over instant messaging? So we have a few options here: SMS, iMessage, WhatsApp, WeChat, Telegram, all the above. And if there is none, just click others and we'll allocate some time to discuss that at the end. So I'll just give the audience a few seconds or a minute to get through that. So guys, what results are you expecting?
I guess from the earlier poll, maybe the others as in like the repurposable none, but it also probably is depending on where people are, geographically, because I know that depending on where you are, I think that the preferred sort of like the communication changes, but
Yeah, I think some of the SMS and the messaging is going to be probably a front runner just because it's been around for a little bit longer and it's generally embraced. But it'll be interesting. It'd be interesting to see what falls under that other category in some follow-up conversations.
Yeah.
Perfect. We'll just give the audience a few more seconds to get some results in. I must say the results are quite interesting so far, guys. Cool. So at the moment we have a tie for SMS and iMessage, 41%, as well as others with 41% as well. WeChat has 8% as well as WhatsApp. So the main two results were SMS, iMessage, and others. Was this the results you were expecting, guys?
Surprised at WhatsApp, considering the time zone where we're in. A lot of people attending from the Americas, North America, and Europe, where it's very popular. I mean, if you look in Latin America and parts of Europe, UK, Germany, and so forth, it's very popular, WhatsApp. So a little bit surprised at that. Well, it could be good to see what the others are.
Yeah, that's actually true. I was also thinking the same thing, especially also a lot of the news that we hear is like also on WhatsApp, and you can literally like talk to anyone, I feel like across the globe. But
Cool. Well, thanks for discussing that, guys. So how can businesses cater to their customers with new communication solutions, yet staying on top of what's being said in these business conversations? Would you like to take this one, Kyle?
Yeah, Russell, I look, I think this is a great question. I think the first thing that I would just state on this is really this is where kind of technology is king. We've seen a lot of advancements in new technology over the years, and to me, this is an area that that firms really should be focused on pulling in kind of what I'd call an optimal solution. Especially when you look at some of what we're trying to react to from a communications perspective. I mean, you look back over the last 2 years, people working from home, and the advancement that I believe is here to stay with some of these new communication channels. As people have worked from home, some have permanently worked from home. We've seen people relocate to new areas, or even inside of offices. It's interesting. You'll have two colleagues sitting at the same shared space, and they're instant messaging each other. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic that we've seen shape into the environment. And what's really happened there is there's been an explosion of data. This is where a lot of that unstructured data comes into play that oftentimes makes people a little bit nervous. It's unstructured. How do we safeguard this data? How do we ensure privacy requirements with this data? How do we alert and connect the data so that we're getting valuable results and not just false positives? And along those lines of false positives, I mean, we recently engaged with one industry member, and some of the analysis they were doing, just looking at alerts out of some legacy systems that they're trying to retrofit to handle some of this, it was showing that they were going to need to onboard like 500 to 600 employees just to manage these review processes. Obviously, that's something that probably doesn't scale. I mean, if I went to my manager and asked for 600 people, I think I'd kind of be laughed out of the room. So I think this is where technology has to step in and augment. I think as I look at some of that technology as well, there's a couple of key things I'd point out. Artificial intelligence is something that most firms have tried. They've taken a step to adopt. They've run some programs. Most firms have probably had a failure in that realm as well. What's really interesting with a lot of the new solutions that are in the market, though, is they're leveraging a new technology like AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning. It's part of their natural code, but they're also bringing that to their customers in a very consumable manner. So there's preloaded models. Firms aren't having to hire their own data scientists to manage these solutions on an ongoing basis. So I would say these new technology solutions have gotten much more friendly to an organization. They're much more easy to operate and to operationalize as well. So there's some interesting things happening there. Also, we look at some of this new technology and how it really helps us understand some of these trends in communication. I mean, for example, I often use the example of I sit down with one of my kids, my 16-year-old. I try to understand his text messaging. Number one, I somehow there's thousands of messages on a daily, weekly basis. And number two, it changes so quick. Something that he tells me meant something, yesterday means something completely different today. And so that's where, firms operating on a global basis, you look at a lot of how people are communicating, how that communication changes so fast. Rieko referenced the lexicons. I mean, uh, I'd argue as well those are outdated. You can't operationalize a lot of these programs with just a lexicon approach. And then also, what I look at is just because of these volumes of data and a lot of these issues that firms are having, some people have kind of reverted to a random sampling approach. And so that random sampling, the regulators don't care if you're doing a great job at random sampling. If they identify something, they're going to identify it. You're going to be held liable. So I think it really pushes firms to have to change and move into a new technology venue. And then it's a question of how you use that technology to leverage kind of a first line review from a technology perspective and more of a high level second line review with your capital, with your employees, really identifying the problematic areas. So I've probably gone a little bit too far over on this question, Russell, but this is one of those areas I think technology really has a dramatic impact. And I don't see a way of firms moving forward in this area without really leveraging some of the new technologies in a very meaningful and strategic manner.
Yeah, I can agree with you more on that, Kyle. And I think that there is actually a lot of demand to, allow business to communicate to external parties, right? I think this is like where it gets more interesting. There would be, way more volume with the communications that you need to store, and all sorts of like channels probably that can exist out there. So also, another sort of factor that we need to think about is, this like new working from home. As you can kind of see, all of us, working from home, it's increasing, and the higher volume of e-communications, that's not going to go away, right? Like face to face, obviously, it's important, but we all know that, it is definitely decreasing. So I think when we kind of like look at like everything, we just like need to also think about sort of like a new way of like, kind of like a business being operated. But as Kyle said, I do think that the best approach really is to stay on top of like the great technology solution. And then, like I said, first and foremost, I think that you may want to look at, if there is like enough archiving space, if you're on-prem, do you need to move to the cloud? So, that's like also one of the things that when you look at the technology, you may want to kind of look at and think about that. But also, look at some solution, if there is a way to maybe separate business and personal instant messaging, to protect maybe employees' privacy. It protects employees' privacy, but also it obviously helps like with the review, right? Kind of like everyone said, you don't really want to comb through any of the private conversations. You shouldn't see them to begin with. But if you didn't, have to, if you could actually didn't have to look at it and, exclude, that would be great. And I think it's also important to stay focused on proactive surveillance, right? Meaning I know sound like a broken record, but, I mean, there is actually a pro with the lexicon. It's great. It's like the mechanism that it worked for a long time. But I do think just lexicon alone is definitely out of date approach, and no one can also come up with all the possible phrases. Not only things change, but there are different ways of things that people can say. There's a typo, there are all sorts of kind of like possible sort of matches that can exist, and you cannot have sort of like a million words of lexicon, unfortunately. So, I think that reviewers don't really want to also, another thing is that you don't want to review every conversation that, has a word, let's say like WhatsApp in it. And that's going to take like Kyle said, it's going to take 50, 60 people that you're going to have to hire. So I think that's where AI or NLP comes in, right? Not only that AI can come up with the different phrases that you can't think of, but it will help eliminate, all the communications that you didn't, need to like review to begin with. NLP recognizes the context, and you don't need to review any like news and research items, for example. Because like a lot of times news or like research paper, they're sort of like known for some of like the kind of like the words that you think that it's going to alert, but if that's the case, obviously you don't need to really see it. And I kind of like just like last point on the AI. I think when it comes to that, everyone I think should keep an eye on how explainable that AI that you will leverage. I think end of the day, if you can explain to the regulators why you are reviewing something or how it was alerted, it'll be a very tough conversation and painful meeting, I'm sure that you're going to be in. And I don't think you can just say, oh, machine was supposed to learn and give me a meaningful alert to review. Oh, I wonder why. So I do think that it's also something, if you're talking to technology, if you're looking for the vendor, something that you definitely want to keep in mind, is it something that, that they will help? And then also I can actually, kind of talk through the actual AI, because, you don't want to actually raise and introduce, different type of risks.
I think, Rieko, I agree with everything you just said, except for the proactive surveillance as a broken record. I think in this age of technology, we should really be calling it broken MP3 player. With the broken, I still have records, so I can hold my hand up and I can remember what
I
a
think
record
records
is.
are nowadays it's cool, by the way.
Yeah, retro cool. But in terms of technology, you're right. The need for technology before you enable these channels and what Carl mentioned in terms of outputs. When we talk to our clients, there is a fear, right? If you switch on texting and WhatsApp for all your employees or a certain department or even certain countries, like, what are we going to get? We're going to get so many thousands of messages a second. Our team's already overwhelmed with email and traditional channels of communication. So how do we control that? So the output is definitely kind of the fear factor. I think going back to basics, having obviously the technology in place to deal with that is key, but a little step back further is looking at the basic standards of communication. So every business has the requirement. So of once you open up these new instant messaging channels, people are going to use them. I think, how do you stop people from sharing confidential documents or pictures or even videos, right? Is it going to be a free for all once everyone's on WhatsApp? They'll be sharing things they shouldn't be sharing. So the kind of data leakage prevention question is uppermost in our client's mind. And you look at it the other way. So one of the beauties of instant messaging is sharing files. So if you're a business and your customers or your external parties are sharing multitude of files of all types, what about virus? What about malware, ransomware? Are you going to allow all these files to be shared into your own enterprise and systems without scanning that? So having that solution in place is critical. Obviously, with more regulated businesses, such as financial services, you need ethical walls and information barriers. So you can't just let everyone talk to every client, every supplier, every colleague in your business. So for banks, having those barriers between different teams, different departments is critical. But I think the main part really is customers need to trust that they're communicating with a real business, an employee. As we mentioned very early on, so many scams. Doesn't matter if you're in the legal industry, financial services, there's already somebody pretending to be you somewhere. So if you're using personal messaging tools and capturing them, that is a way, but you're not preventing that. So having the ability to use official messaging accounts, official APIs and integrations, safeguards, obviously the customer data, they know they're talking to a business persona as such, rather than a personal random number. I assume to my relationship manager or my lawyer, as well as, this is the standard that we expect of every communication. So not just, messaging. So just really just looking at more of the basics before people kind of think, yeah, it's a great idea, but, it's just the basics to consider.
Thanks for addressing that one, guys. Just a quick reminder to the audience, you can still send in questions for the speakers. If you click ask a question on the bottom banner of your screen, you can address questions to the speakers. I'll now discuss our final topic. So, how can businesses benefit from utilizing popular instant messaging apps? What's your take on that, Cal?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. I mean, I would boil this down, Russell, to removing unnecessary restrictions. Oftentimes we prove our value by overcomplicating a scenario, is kind of how I feel. And so when we overcomplicate a lot of these things, it imposes a lot of unnecessary restrictions, which are frustrating to employees and they're frustrating to customers. And so as I look at the benefits of using a lot of these messaging apps, I mean, it really is, it's bringing the employee and the customer experience back into the foresight of all of our organizations and all of our plans as we try to move forward. There's, back from my old sales days, there was always a saying, if you're not talking to your prospect, someone else is. So, it shows that ultimately all of us work for a customer. We need to be in communication with those. What's really interesting, one of the statements that when Chilip was talking just a second ago on the previous question, it made me think, if an institution that I do business with communicates with me in a way that is not my preferred way, or not what is something that I'm not used to, because of all of these spam messages, the phishing, just everything that goes on these days, I simply do not respond. So if you don't communicate in the way that I want to with me in the manner that I'm used to, then I simply take my business elsewhere, because I just assume that it's a scam being run by someone else trying to get my data or something like that. So that's kind of what I'd boil it down to, is just unnecessary restrictions. How do we eliminate those? How do we enable our customers, our employees, to communicate and interact in a very effective and meaningful manner? I don't know if Chilip or Echo have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can add. I think we can also kind of look at it, from also, maybe business intelligence point of view. Business can also benefit, kind of in a slightly different way. Now, you are allowing instant messaging. I think that's actually like another sort of additional data point that you can, run analysis and so forth. So, do you actually see like more conversations in instant messaging? Maybe that is actually a preferred way to like have a conversation, and if you can introduce to other sort of employees, what are the demographics too, right? And then you can also see like some correlation between, like, let's say, top advisors and how they leverage the instant messaging, but it's also actual like some sort of content, also how long that they're spending their time and so forth. So I think it's also a good way, kind of like something that what Kyle was alluding, a way to sort of like look at it is, a lot of things that you can just use the data from, kind of like, we start from archiving or monitoring, but now we also have a data. What do we actually really do with that we can, maybe affect the bottom line, or we can, actually look at it in a different way. So, I do think that it's a great way to kind of like benefit by, allowing everyone on the instant messaging apps. But also, obviously, kind of like we talked earlier, I think that people need to recognize the way that people are, communicating is also changing. It's kind of similar as like this whole work from home. There are a lot of like organizations that do not want to recognize that maybe that is actually, something that like the employees prefer, and you have to kind of strike a balance of, do we want to do it, or do we want to, keep the culture? I think it's similar here that, you want to make sure that you give an opportunity to kind of adapt where things are changing, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you kind of like strike the right balance is what I think. Chuck, what's your take?
No, thanks for that, Rieko. I think definitely the balance is important, and also what Kyle has said, it's about the customer experience. I think that's one thing we shouldn't forget, and we've seen in different reports. So I was looking at a Zendesk report from earlier this year, reviewing the different benchmark data points from, they have 94,000 clients who use their customer support platform. And it showed a 370% increase of WhatsApp usage. So customers contacting businesses via that platform, whilst in the same period of time, 10% increase in email. So even though we're all online and doing everything, people wanted to communicate on these instant messaging apps. So you're losing that ability to service your customers. And Carl's right. If they're not getting the service from their business, they will look elsewhere. But also back to the kind of employee experience. So what I've seen and really about productivity as well is we've seen clients where they screenshot their text message or SMS because that's the only way they can record it. And you can imagine hundreds, potentially thousands of screen captures, screenshots of SMS and text, because that is a record, legitimate. Yes, it is a record, but you can imagine the pain that causes. But having that ability, if you have technologies to integrate that with your CRM, with your client management tool, instead of searching for all that output, all that data, it's already integrated next to your client, next to your case, next to your dispute, next to your matter. And we've also seen from a bank perspective, obviously the traders, the relationship managers, the private bankers, they use it, but we've also seen HR. So HR in a bank have been requesting to use a technology solution to contact their candidates. So while the candidates are not responding to email, they don't want to have random phone calls. So it's the easiest way to reach out to the candidates. And obviously, as we mentioned earlier, Carl did on the Great Resignation and the difficulty filling the void and these roles. But also there's bigger opportunities as well. So take China, for example. If you're not on WeChat, I'm not sure how you're communicating with your customers, your suppliers, your counterparties. I don't know. I mean, China is predominantly WeChat, so over any form of communication. So we've seen US private banks who are using a solution for them, UK law firms as well. They're using solutions so they can communicate with their clients on WeChat. And you look at emerging industries such as the crypto industry, it's all about Telegram. That is the preferred communication. So if you don't have a solution for that, and you're considering as a business or an institution, how are you going to reach out to the people? They've got hundreds, maybe thousands in these conversations, in these groups. They're all on Telegram. They're not going to be responding to emails or phone calls. So I think, I think there's a lot of opportunity. And as Rieko mentioned, it's that data. You have data that can inform, can augment, not just compliance and full risk, but product, sales and marketing, all types of data to help inform your business. So what's going on with your customers? What's going on with your business? Having those conversations.
Thank you for discussing that, guys. Very interesting discussion and topics raised. Now it's time for the Q&A. Quick reminder to the audience, you can still send in questions via the banner at the bottom. Just click the ask a question and we can address each question to the speakers. Cool. So the first question from the audience, this one reads, what do you see as the risk for businesses in the future if they don't adapt to a technology solution for instant messaging apps?
I can take that first. I mean, it's probably echoing what we've just spoke about, but it's about opportunity. If your customers are at these messaging apps, they're communicating, they're responsive, they're enjoying that experience, why would you force them to the contact center, force them to email, Zoom, Teams, and all that fatigue of having online conferences and having those scheduled meetings? So your customers, your external parties, that they want to use these applications. And we've seen, obviously, the popularity of all different types, but you're missing out on opportunity. So if you're not enabling this, your competitors will be. So, that's really my thoughts.
Thank you, guys. Would anyone like to add anything, or should we move on?
I think we can move on since we actually talked about it. So whomever asked the question was not paying attention toward the last. Just kidding.
Sorry, that's my fault. It's always me.
No.
Thank you. So, a few more from the audience. This one reads, what is the first step a bank should take if they want to add WhatsApp as an approved channel?
I can take that. I think, banks need to leverage a solution that can, capture WhatsApp conversations, whether if it's a company device or their own device. So, I think that's also something that people kind of need to realize, that it's not always the company device, but if it's your own device, like how does that capturing really work? And obviously, they also need to make sure that, those are actually archived properly and retain, as we talked about. But I think that's sort of the first step.
Yeah, Rieko, it's interesting. I would completely agree with that. We often get that question of what should we do? We're looking at embracing this, we're looking at embracing that. And I think the bottom line is, with any communication channel that you endorse as a firm, there has to be a capture and surveillance methodology. And so you have to look at those two. You can't risk assess, for example, a new communication line and say, well, we're going to allow this and we'll have a surveillance and a capture mechanism up in place in a year. That's not going to work for any of the regions across the world, I don't believe. So that really is the first thing. How do we capture and how do we surveil? That has to go out the door at the same time as that new communication channel does.
Yeah, I guess, Kyle, like you said, how quickly, right? Like if it's going to take a really long time, then that might really not be the best solution.
Yeah.
Thanks again, guys, for elaborating on that. Next one from the audience. What about people using personal mobile phones and not corporate phones? What's your take on that, guys?
Yeah, I'll maybe hit that one first. I mean, look, my personal opinion on this is that kind of the bring your own device process goes out the door at a certain point. If for nothing more than you look at the experience that we're trying to give to all of our customers, managing kind of the lines of having it being used as personal for a lot of things that may not be allowed for work, and then as work, it's just, we've seen that there's too many issues that can happen. You're downloading applications that you shouldn't, or you're blocked from downloading applications that you want to use. And so I personally think the bring your own device is something that's kind of going away. We are moving much more towards, look, if employers want you to work remotely, want you to be able to do these things off hours, then they need to equip you with the necessary tools so that you can do that job as well. It's kind of my personal opinion. Don't know if there's something that's contrary by the panel.
I know we're coming to the end of the session, but I'll just say, if you look at the recent headlines, reported 100 top bankers and executives in North America have had their phones seized, their personal phones. So nobody wants to be in that situation. So it is definitely a movement towards more the corporate approved official devices, rather than where we were 3 to 5 years ago, where is the favorite personal or BYOD model.
Cool. Thanks again, guys. We're coming to the end of the session. So last question from the audience. Again, if your question did not get addressed, I'm sure the speakers will address it at a later time. So this one reads, can you discuss capturing iMessage?
So iMessage, in terms of that one, it's a very topical question. Obviously, it's kind of like the holy grail. We have come up with a methodology that captures official iMessage information, and be happy to speak to that individual or whoever asked that question to dig into further detail and show you a demonstration. I think it's something that's been lacking in the market for many, many years, but we do have a solution to that, along with all the other messaging solutions that we have. But happy to take that more offline.
Thank you. Thanks again. Unfortunately, that's all the questions we have time for. Again, if it wasn't answered during this session, I'm sure the speakers will get back to you on a later date. So that just leaves me to thank all our speakers today for what was a great presentation, and to thank LeapXpert in collaboration with Shield and FIS for sponsoring today's session. Would you guys like to say anything to end this session?
I would just say this is a frontline conversation and topic for everyone. So we appreciate everyone's time and attention in the webinar. And if there are any questions, please let us know.
Yeah, thank you. I think, 1 hour taken out of your work time is, such a valuable time that you shared with us. So I think we definitely want to thank you, if you stick around.
Many thanks all, and have a good evening, good morning, or good night, wherever you are.
Thank you guys once again. To the attendees, you'll receive an email shortly how you can access the on-demand version of this webinar. You can access this through our website, which is www.business-reviews-.com. Thank you once again, and I hope you all have a nice day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.